I personally have a friend who's just done esports, and we did a track day together in New Zealand, and the guy had everything, natural feeling of the car, what was happening, and that came from esports. It was the first time I'd seen it firsthand, and it was pretty cool.
Liam, you've had a huge year. Just tell me about what it's been like, everything that's happened.
Yeah, it's been it's been a big shift in the last 12 months. Obviously, I had my first races in Formula One, which in itself was a big life accomplishment. And then now I'm in a position where obviously I'm trying to get back into a full-time seat, but still at all the Formula One races as reserve now for Red Bull and VCARB.
Can you just describe what it's like when you get in that seat for the first time?
It's very, obviously very big moments, and something that you sort of anticipate the years growing up towards Formula One. You imagine what it's going to be like to step into the car, and it's, I would say it's pretty similar to what you imagine it. It's a very, very big moment. There's a lot of people looking. I would say that's probably the bit you don't expect so much is the eyes that are on you. There's a lot of pressure, but just a very cool experience.
I would imagine that drivers like you are probably some of the best people under pressure. Do you have any techniques for how you manage to block it all out?
Honestly, it's you can work on it obviously and do sort of training around that, but it's really experience. That's the main thing. So having years of dealing with it, being a Red Bull junior, that in itself was a lot of pressure as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid, having Dr. Marco phoning you. Those in itself are moments of pressure, and obviously the whole program is based around performance. So always trying to do well enough to stay in the program. There's more pressure there. So I think it's just experience.
A lot of our listeners will be long-time F1 fans. Some will be slightly newer to it because of Drive to Survive, which you were on. I'm wondering, did your socials blow up after appearing on that? How did that change things?
It definitely changed things. It's funny because it was something that for months before it came out, I was sort of playing it off like I wasn't really stressed about it. And then I remember a couple of days before it dropped, I was actually really nervous because you don't really know how you're going to look on it as well. You don't remember what you've said over all those races. It was a pretty intense time. So it was very, very cool, and I think a pretty cool opportunity to be a part of it.
Do you think it's quite good that you're getting to show a different side of yourself? Were you happy with what you saw?
I was reasonably happy. I think it came out okay. Obviously, I hope everybody else thinks that as well. But yeah, I think it showed a good sort of insight into what those races were like, especially behind the scenes, obviously, with what was going on within Red Bull and myself and what was happening with that race seat. I think it gave a pretty good insight into that.
Now, especially at the moment, there's always loads of driver gossip about. I'm just wondering, do you find that quite annoying? How do you deal with it, having people always discussing and speculating?
No, it's definitely not annoying. It's obviously a massive part of the sport, especially this year. There's a lot of seats that are available, so there's a lot of speculation on where people are going to go. So it's not annoying, but it's a part of it right now, and obviously everyone's very, very curious, including myself, into what's going to happen.
For anyone who doesn't know your journey into F1, can you just tell our listeners how you got into it?
I have no idea where the initial passion came from. It was something that I was born with. My family never raced or anything like that. But my best mate in preschool got into go-karts, and then that's how I got into it. So I raced go-karts in New Zealand, and then basically stepped into sort of entry-level cars like Formula Ford and things like that. And then I moved to Europe to race F4, and then I got picked up by Red Bull. So since then, it's been being a part of Red Bull all the way up until this point, and sort of stepping up the ladder through F3, F2, and Super Formula. And now I'm in a reserve position. So it's all happened very fast.
And you mentioned go-karting, which feels like it's the way that most people got into it traditionally, but increasingly a lot of people are doing it through sims like this one and these kind of rigs. Do you think that this is also a way people can now get into F1?
It's becoming much more of a way than it's ever been, and I think every year it gets closer and closer, and especially with esports and the online sim racing side of it is very, very high level, just as high level, honestly, in terms of the driving. If I get in a sim and versus a pro sim racer, they will destroy me. So it's very, very high level. And it's becoming more realistic, so it's definitely a way of sort of stepping in. I mean, we can't really test outside of the Formula One weekends, so all the development we do really comes from simulators.
Do you think in the future we'll see more people coming from esports then into onto the actual track?
I don't know if it'll ever be more because everyone will still be go-kart racing and doing those sports, but I think it's definitely it's going to be higher. There's going to be more drivers coming from esports and sim racing, and there's already guys doing tests about sort of drivers who have never raced. I personally have a friend who's just done esports in his life, and we did a track day together in New Zealand, and the guy had everything, natural feeling of the car, what was happening, and that came from esports, which it was the first time I'd seen it firsthand, and it was pretty cool.
Who won? Did you still beat them though?
I still beat him, yeah, but I got a little bit more experience, so.
That seems fair. Well, it's like you're probably going to beat me a bit later on.
I don't know, man. Honestly, I struggle in these games sometimes. So if you've been practicing, have you been practicing?
No.
We'll see then. We'll see. I think especially on the career mode side of these games, especially the most recent one, and this game looks very, very promising in that sense. The career side is, it actually does show a pretty good insight into what it's like. You have pressure from your agent, from what I've seen in there, which you have in real life. And then there's obviously all the fans and people watching, and that's sort of something that is relatable to real life. So I think it does honestly give a pretty good insight.
I felt like you were about to sell out your agent there for a sec.
No.
If you'd have had this version of the game growing up, do you think it would have potentially helped spark that interest even earlier? What do you reckon?
Potentially for somebody who maybe is sort of on the edge of sort of being super interested in Formula One or not. For me, I'm lucky that it's something that I was apparently born with, and I've never sort of lacked passion for the sport. So, but if you're somebody who's not heard of it or is getting into it, this is definitely a way that is going to give you a good insight, and I think can potentially make that transition from being sort of maybe somebody who has an idea about Formula One to somebody who's a proper sort of fan and has a passion for the sport.
There'll be people listening to this, watching this, who really want to go into and do what you do. What words of inspiration would you have? For
me, honestly, it's been, especially from being from New Zealand, it's very far away, and it's always been harder to sort of make the step overseas. So it's self-belief. It's sort of not listening to the doubt, because there's a lot of people that will obviously tell you that things aren't possible. So yeah, maybe it sounds sort of cheesy, but it's just honestly believing in yourself and sort of ignoring everything else.
You now have to spend a bit more time in Milton Keynes than I think a lot of people would. How good are you at driving around roundabouts? Well,
I lived there as well for 4.5 years. I lived in Milton Keynes, so yeah, it's fair to say I've done a few roundabouts in my time, and that's probably the best part about living in Milton Keynes is the roundabouts.
The best part?
There's not many highlights to living in Milton Keynes, so I would say that's one of the few highlights, yeah. I mean, you have street circuits that have things that are pretty close to it, so Monaco is a track that has a bit of everything, but I would say, yeah, like the hairpin in Monaco is tighter than most roundabouts in Milton Keynes.
So going around a roundabout in Milton Keynes can help you prepare for Monaco?
It's good preparation for Monaco.